Chapter 7. A strange meeting. Oliver was very happy and content with Mrs. Maylie and Rose, but even so, he had not forgotten about Mr. Brownlow and Mrs. Bedouin in London. He longed to see them and tell them how happy he was. He worried that they might still think of him as an ungrateful liar and thief. Dr. Losberne promised to take Oliver to visit them as soon as he was well enough to make such a long journey. At the last day, Oliver and Dr. Losberne set out together in a small carriage. Oliver knew the name of the quiet, shady street on which Mrs. Brownlow lived, and the driver was instructed to go directly there. When the carriage finally turned onto the street, Oliver became so excited that he could not sit still. The doctor smiled and patted him gently. Oliver pointed to the right house and prepared to jump out of the carriage and run up the stairs, but the Brownlow house was empty. The sign in the window said that the house was for rent. The doctor inquired at the house next door for news of the old gentleman and discovered that both he and Mrs. Bedouin had left on a ship for the West Indies. Oliver was disappointed. The doctor sighed, telling the driver to return home immediately. In the past, Oliver's days had always been spent among noisy, dirty crowds of people. There in the country, he felt almost as if he was beginning a new life. Every morning, he walked over to the cottage of a pleasant old gentleman who taught him to read and write. When he returned, he would either listen as Rose sang or read aloud, or he would help Mrs. Maylie in the garden. In the evening, he would prepare his lessons for the next day. He usually worked in a little room in the back of the house. His desk there was beside a window that was framed with vines of sweet-smelling honeysuckle. One beautiful evening, when the summer light was just beginning to fade, Oliver sat reading at the window. He had been working very hard, and little by little he fell asleep. But although he dozed, he was still aware of what was going on around him. Suddenly the air seemed to become musty. He could no longer smell the honeysuckle outside his window. Oliver thought with terror that he was in Fagin's house again. He thought he could hear Fagin whispering to someone about him. Oliver awoke with a start and looked up. He realized that he had been daydreaming, but to his horror, Fagin was at his window. Next to him stood a mean-looking man with a long, pointed nose whom Oliver had never seen before. The two of them turned and were gone in an instant. Oliver leaped into the garden and cried loudly for help. Fagin had been angry when he learned that Bill Sikes had left Oliver, wounded outside the Maylie house. He wanted the robber to return for the boy. A week after Oliver saw him at the window, Fagin went to the rooms above the tavern where Bill Sikes usually stayed. He found Nancy, wrapped in a shawl, staring sadly into the fire. "Oh, it's you, Nancy," Fagin said in surprise. "I haven't seen you in a very long time." "Not long enough for me, Fagin," said the woman bitterly, without even turning her head. Fagin shrugged. "Where do you think Bill is?" he asked. "I saw the child, and he is well again. Bill must bring him back to me." "Did you hear what I said, Nancy? I must speak to Bill about Oliver Twist." Nancy turned and said, "The child is better where he is than among us. Leave him. If he hasn't spoken to the police by now, he never will." Then she sank back into her chair and stared at the fire again. Fagin was enraged because Nancy would not help him find Bill Sikes. "What?" he cried, shaking his fist at her. "Leave him, when the boy is worth so much money to me." Suddenly, Fagin stopped and put his hand over his mouth. He looked around quickly. Nancy had not moved. Fagin did not know whether she had heard him or not. "Nancy, my dear," he said in a pleasant voice. "You were not listening to me just then, were you?" Nancy mumbled that she had never bothered to listen to him anymore. Fagin then turned to go, saying that he could not wait for Bill Sikes to return. Fagin went home to find a man wrapped in a dark cloak standing outside his door. He was the same man Oliver had seen outside of his window whispering with Fagin. As the two men went upstairs, they were followed by Nancy. She moved very quietly and stayed in the shadows close to the wall, where they could not see her. She had only pretended not to hear what Fagin had to say about Oliver. She knew that he was planning to use the boy for some evil purpose, so she decided to try to find out what it was. Nancy did not want Fagin to ruin Oliver's life in the same way that he had ruined hers. Fagin took the man into his room. He knew that no one, except for one of the thieves who worked with him, could find them there. They sat down at the table to talk. "Well, monks," Nancy heard Fagin say to the stranger, "we saw the boy ourselves. Why couldn't you have kept him here and turned him into the thief like the other boys?" asked the man called the monks. "Why did you ever send him out on that robbery in the first place?" "It wasn't that easy," said Fagin. "He isn't like the other boys, but don't worry. We will get him back. Did you find the workhouse where he was born? Yes, I gave some money to a man there named Bumble, and found out all I needed to know. They have no idea who the parents of Oliver Twist were. If all goes well, I will be able to keep his fortune for myself, replied Monks. Everything will go well, cried Fagin eagerly. No one will ever find out who the boy really is, and I will make him a thief, and he will steal from me. If you do, I will pay you a great deal of money. First, however, you must get him back again. There is no need to send Bill Sikes all the way into the country. They are all here in London for a few weeks. The old man has some business to attend to. It amazes me that the boy has fallen into the same household with Rose Maylie. If only they knew. Suddenly, Monks cried out and pointed to the wall. Fagin, look, I saw a woman's shadow. Calm yourself, said Fagin. You are always becoming excited over nothing. We are alone.